Welcome, dear core groups, again for another week of just going over the sermon series as we're in the middle of the series of the waiting. And if you have been here today in church, I kind of just showed that graph, that a picture that the Lord gave me for how everything plays together. Like we have the will of God. God has a will for our life. And maybe in the core group right now, you get to share about a calling or something that you know that God has given you. Maybe a vision for bringing one of your prodigals back home, and maybe a job, maybe a promotion at work or something. But you know that there is a will of God. But then there's this fork in the road, and the one is helping yourself and just taking the shortcut, giving God a hand in this and just trying to bring it about in your own way. But then the other thing is waiting for the right timing. See, when we talk about timing of God, we have to talk about waiting, because those two go together. We only see the timing of God once we wait. I have to say, in my life, least of the things that God has ever done were right in the moment, very spontaneous and right away. Most of the things that God wanted to do, there was always a time of preparation. There was always a time of letting me wait. But it was not like a fruitless waiting, but it was actually fruitful waiting, because it prepared me in my life. Getting ready, dropping on my knees, just being before God, seeking His face and seeking His will. This is where we learn the discipline of fasting. Praying and fasting is something that not many people nowadays do anymore, but that's where we have this earnestness of seeing God's will done in our life, and where we come and approach this throne room of God, and we underline it basically with the fasting, by praying and by fasting. And this is kind of what gets us into the presence of God. Today I was talking about, and I just want to read this again from Hebrews chapter 6, verse 12, where he says, so that you may not be sluggish. It's one of the things, like we can no longer lean back. We can no longer be sluggish or just forget about what God's plan is. We gotta be all in. We gotta be all in God's plan, what He wants to do. But instead be imitator of those. And he's talking here about examples of faith. We have different, each one of us, we can think probably immediately about a couple of people where we feel like spiritually they got it all together. They have it figured out. They walk so close with God. They can hear God's voice. God is using them in a mighty way. And maybe thousands of people are coming to know Jesus through that person, and ministry that God is doing through them. Maybe we know of some people, but there is a key to what gets them there, right? And that key is right here. It says, those who through faith and patience inherit the promise. Those are those two main ingredients that we need to see God's will fulfilled in our life. One of them is just this waiting period through patience, right? But we will never have this patience, because in order to wait, it puts us in this tension, into this unknown phase in our life. And the only thing that keeps us at peace during this long waiting period, during this long time period, is faith. If we don't have faith, we won't have the patience, because we're always going to say, waiting for what? What are we waiting for? But if we have faith, we're always going to say, I do not know for what, but right now I just trust God that you have it. And I'm just going to put it in your hands, and I'm just going to sit this out until you have told me exactly when and where. But it's this faith aspect. See, when Saul was surrounded by a great army, and his smaller army was in turmoil, and they were like, King Saul, what are we supposed to do? The pressure was on from the outside, and he didn't know what to do, because the person through whom God usually speaks didn't show up yet, and it was his job to offer the sacrifice and speak a blessing before them going out to battle. But in this moment, Saul had no faith that it's going to work out, that God is going to come through. So instead, he did his own thing. It's that faith sometimes, this trusting in God. You know, when we have Israel come, God delivers them out of Egypt, lead them through the Red Sea, all the way across the desert. He's giving them the law, right? And even there, when he's giving them the law, Moses was on the mountain. Oh, he has been there now for 40 days. He's not coming back. What are they doing? They're not waiting. Aaron, they say, Aaron, make us a golden calf. Make us a God that will lead us. You know, it's like when you have no faith, you will have no patience to wait for what God wants to do. When they come all the way across finally to the promised land, God wants to give them a promised land, but they still have to conquer it, right? But they're coming to this promised land. There's giants and fortresses in there. And sometimes things in our life, they look like giants. Things in our life, they look like those fortresses that they're impenetrable somehow. But in that moment, when they all started murmuring and grumbling against God and against the leadership, and they said, oh, it would have been better for us never to left slavery, and let's go back, let's choose a different leader and head back there to Egypt into slavery again. Because, and here's the reason that they gave, our kids are going to fall prey to those people, and we're not going to be strong enough. And there's different reasons in their logical mind, in the mind of the flesh. There was all valid reasons, but yet the God factor was not in it. The God factor was not in it. If they would have had that faith in that moment, they all would have seen the promised land. But instead, because they were faithless and disobeyed as a consequence, they disobeyed God, God had to turn over this whole generation. Our prayer is in this season right now that we get to know God. We don't ever want to miss the will of God for our life, but sometimes we have to wait for it. But this waiting is a time of preparation. So as you're talking about this, maybe just read Hebrews chapter 6 verse 12 here. Through faith and patience inheriting the promise. Maybe share, encourage one another, maybe with example where it worked and where it didn't work, where you just lost it and you just did it on your own and in some way did not result into the results that God wanted to do. But then maybe also bring an example about when you waited patiently and then in the right timing, in the ways of God, how God wanted to do it, He brought about the situation, and encourage one another. I guarantee you there's going to be sitting somebody in that group that needs to hear that. So God bless you, share about it, and we'll see you next Sunday.